Hello and welcome to Gotham Sound TV. I am Peter Schneider and I am very happy to present to you something a little different today. Normally, we highlight a specific product, and today I wanted to talk about a process. So I had the opportunity to record some music, totally not something I do. Usually I'm a film sound mixer. Put me on set, I'm comfortable there for the most part. But a musician that I really like, Ike Reilly, was doing a tour for St. Patrick's Day in the Midwest, and I thought it would be a good show. I had a feeling there'd be some good shows in there. So I wanted to see if I could put together a rig that could multi-track record those shows and do it as a kind of by myself, basically. Do it totally for the artist. Couldn't afford to bring anybody with me, and so could I do it by myself? I'm not saying that that's recommended, and as we'll see, a number of compromises had to be made in order to achieve that goal. Also, I should say, when I say by myself, as you'll hear throughout this little presentation, there was a lot of help that I had, a tremendous amount of help. But basically, I had to schlep it and be responsible for it to be schlepped by myself. Let's talk about recording music. I've done it once or twice. Again, not my comfort zone. But I know live shows, you start to think about what are the design criteria. So there's the design criteria for, recording a live show, and there's the design criteria for being really compact and being able to kind of do it by yourself. And this really gets to the heart of what I wanted to talk to you about today. I will highlight specific gear today, but really it is about when you have design criteria, how does that inform all the other decisions down the line, and then what are the consequences of those decisions. So let's start with recording live music and concerts. In my experience, you have to be really transparent and make it as easy as possible for the front of the house mixer. They really run the show at the venue in terms of sound and often other things that they have to deal with. But really, everything that you do in terms of a rig can't really be too much of a burden for them, or else you'll just be shut out completely. So that means to me that you have to bring splitters, because most venues don't have splitters for like a recording, and so that then becomes part of your rig. I coordinated with Ike's tour manager to come up with an input list, and we figured out that 24 inputs should cover it, and so that was our magic number. So I guess the first thing is to bring splitters that are microphone level splitters that are decent quality, because what I think helps with integrating into front of house is you say to the front of house mixer, you can get the direct side of the splitter, and I, the recording engineer, will take the isolated side. So for those that don't necessarily know splitters like this, they're 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, and one side is direct, just a hardwired connection, and the other outputs are separated by a transformer. Transformers are good because they isolate you. And I think they're good from your perspective as the person recording it, because you're isolated from the front of house system for the most part. And they're good from the front of house's perspective because essentially your equipment can go down and they're not relying on you. They supply the phantom power, to any mics that require phantom power direct boxes. It's as if they're directly connected to it and you're isolated, galvanically is the fancy word for it, from them. And I think that this sort of like puts front of house sound mixers at ease when you say that. What that means though in terms of equipment is you can't just have any old crappy microphone splitter. If you're going to be on the other side of that transformer, you need high quality transformers. For me, and I think there's a lot of subjective opinion in this, Crimson audio transformers are really good value. They sound great, they're affordable, and they're built like a tank. And so the compromise is they are quite heavy. And you just have to deal with that. So there you can see this is the rack with the splitters, and I'll go through it in detail in a moment. So the first sort of point in the signal chain is are the splitters. The splitters, the direct side, have a tail that goes to the house, because we said they get the direct side, and the isolated side goes into our next link in the chain. So we know we need the splitters, and now normally what would happen is from the splitters, the next link in the chain might be, if it's 24 channels you're after, you might bring 24 pair analog cable and a couple hundred feet of it to go off somewhere. That's great if you have people to help you. I couldn't rely on that. So I needed it to be self-contained with the splitters. Wherever it was going to go to next needed to be with the splitters, and that is the preamp. And so I started to think about what preamps could these splitters go to. There's a number of different options, a number of great options. But they all have compromises. A lot of them, like the Focusrite RedNets, there's Millennium, there's a whole bunch. They tend to come in groups of 8. I needed maximum density. I was traveling by myself. I couldn't, afford another 3 rack spaces in terms of weight. So for me, I am almost immediately went to the Joco 24 mic preamp with a Dante card. So 24 outputs of the splitters go into 24 mic inputs of the Joco, their mic line inputs. And I went with Dante and the Dante option because if this is going to be on stage, then obviously it's not practical for me to be on stage. And so I needed a way to get the signals far away, maybe 100 or 200 feet away, depending on the situation. So the Joco sits in the rack that's on stage. I also knew that if it was going to be the preamp and it was going to be the Dante sending device, that I really needed it to be autonomous. Obviously, it does need power. The splitters are passive, but the Joco box needs power. But the Joco has an advantage that it's natively 12 volts DC. And so the next thing in the rack is the PSC Power Life, which can supply 12 volts to the Joco. And even if we unplug it, the Joco is totally fine. And that's important because I need it to be autonomous. I can't run on stage and start to troubleshoot power issues if somebody accidentally kicks out the power. So, from the initial sort of idea, and the initial goals, that starts to inform the equipment choices. Now, we have our mic pre's. The Joco actually also is our recorder. And if you look up here, there's the hard drive. I just pulled it out of the rack so you can see it, and it can record. But I need a way to control the Joco. Now, the Joko design team, Joe Bull, shout out to Joe Bull, they have a number of great ways to control the Joko. They all revolve around the iPad. And Jared, if we can go to the overhead. Yeah, so here's the iPad app. But the iPad has some limitations. First of all, iPads in general, iPad control apps, work with either Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. And the Joko will happily control the iPad via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. But remember, part of the design consideration is that the Joko lives on stage and I might be a floor down, or at one point I thought I might be in the band's van, like in the parking lot. Could be one place if there's no room. I really had a plan on not being within Wi-Fi or Bluetooth range. And Joe Bull has smartly, and Joko has smartly come up with a way to hardwire. And if we go to the overhead, I don't know if you can see it. I'm just going to nudge this over. Oh, it's Velcroed in place. But anyways, it's a stereo mini that goes into the iPad. And the Joko will actually work hardwired with an iPad. It's sort of an ingenious way for people of a certain age, if they remember modem tones. That's sort of what's going on here, and that's how it works. It's very, very cool. But again, it's not very practical to string a mini cable, 200 feet. So I started digging into it, and natively, the Joko talks to a box via RS422. And RS422 is a balanced signal. And that will happily run over Cat5. So right now, if we go to the wide, we're just doing it the normal way with the cable that it comes with. Because I only had a pair of these, I wanted to take it out and show it. Yeah, if we can go, yeah, thank you, Joe. I made up these RS422 to Cat5 barrels, and then it let me use Ethercon cable. And yeah, connected to the little Joko control box. And I was able to get 200 feet out of this, no problem. And yeah, there was an identical one on the other end. And yeah, RS422 happily ran over Cat5. So we had our Dante control signal, and we had, our Dante audio signal and our RS422 control signal over two different strands of Cat5. And that actually worked. I think we have a picture, Jared, of the unit on stage before the show. So there it is. And it sort of happily lived there. You can see a bunch of sources are plugged into the Crimson splitters. And like I said, there's a snake at the back that goes into the house's snake box input. And then a Cat5 goes around the corner. I was actually in the club's office hanging out. So we'll take a quick look now at my side of things, or the sort of person side of things. I monitored and made a backup recording on a Sound Devices Pix 270. And I did that because it offers different ways of soloing tracks very quickly. It's a fine backup recorder. And I also am able to tie into the network. It's got two Ethernet ports, so I just configured them in switched mode. And so here, if we switch to the computer, here's the Dante controller, right there's the Sound Devices, right there's the Joko. Joko's transmitting to the Sound Devices. Just a very straightforward route. The Joko does something very, very interesting, which is it can make a little mix, and we'll get to that in a second. But those mix tracks and solo tracks it sends on Dante channels 25, 26, and 27, and 28, which is super handy. So you can actually monitor them. And that's how I was able to quickly solo stuff and go between the backup recording and what the Joko was sending. And I also have the advantage of PixNet, so I have complete control, and I could name all the tracks. Yeah, I think the track names are still in there. And Jared, yeah, so there they are. And Jared, we have a close-up of, there it is, the 270 with in the middle of the show. So yeah, and oh, I should highlight also, this is how I'm able to set gain. So this is the Joco iPad screen. And you switch between two main modes. One is the mic preamp control mode. So we have a mic plugged in here, and this is, yeah, there it is. Hey, hey, hey. So you can see this is in input 24. I can control the gain. I can control the gain directly, and then I can lower it down. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's gain control, and there's a number of different other options. And there's phantom power. There's I can switch between mic and line and different pads. You can see a lot of the, you know, it's rock and roll, so there's a lot of pads engaged. Now, some of you may say, but Peter, I thought you said front of house provides phantom power. And that is true, except the last 4 inputs I flipped because those I used for audience and room mics. Again, you know, one of the compromises in keeping it to 24 tracks is I only had 4 mics left over for audience and room mics. But I think, you know, I think it's enough. So mic input control mode is one mode, and then I could make a mix or monitor. And I can do my solos and PFLs, and those go out on the 2 different buses, and I can make a mix, and I can pan. And it's adequate. It's, you know, one of the issues I had was that it, by default, is 20 dB down, but luckily the Pix has a way to gain up by 20 dB. And so that's how I was able to compensate for that on those, just those inputs. And it's just the monitor mix that's 20 dB down. But anyways, you can make a kind of a mix to kind of hear what's going on. I actually, my plan, you know, again, one person, I was just going to track. I toyed briefly with the idea of doing, you know, bringing a mixer and you know, making a live mix, like a proper mix. That's beyond my scope. And again, it's too much gear. I needed it to be, I wanted it to be DC. I needed it to be light as possible. And so this was an ideal scenario for me. All right, so that all was the theory, and I'm kind of presenting it to you nicey, as if everything worked perfectly. And we could end the live stream right now, but I think A, I would be lying, and B, I would be doing a huge disservice, both to people that are watching this and thinking like, oh, that's all that it needs, and also the people that really helped. I have shipped gear before, and I know that things don't always go as planned, so I did build in an extra day. The first show that I was to record was in Chicago at Fitzgerald's nightclub in Berwyn. I knew I needed a day, so I had everything with permission shipped to Second City Sound, and I have to say, just, you know, Jerry Formicola really did, and his people there saved my bacon, because when the stuff got there, it got there on time, but it must have taken a huge hit because all of the rack screws had pushed out of the rack, and, you know, whatever time it had spent after that huge hit, it just must have been smashed up against the front of the case over and over and over and over again until we opened it up. Crimson survived, the PowerStar Life survived, Joco did not. So the first thing is, you know, even if you're a one-person band, you have to plan for proper backups and no sort of funny business with the backups. You really, you know, if there's a critical piece, if you have one piece of gear doing 3 things like the Joco was, then you really ought to have a backup. And so, you know, when you choose your gear, that's part of the consideration, is can you bring 2 of them with you?
Dan at Full Scale AV, the distributor of the Joco, really, again, helped me out tremendously. Got a replacement unit to me on a, late Friday into Saturday. And, that part was solved. We had to reinforce all of the rack rails with those SKB nuts, which I may have this memory to my dying day. I said to Jerry Formicola, if only someplace nearby had these stupid SKB nuts, because I know we don't have that many of them. We have a few, but Jerry basically brought out a bucket of them. And so I was able to reinforce every screw hole. And that was sort of the least of how he helped. So really, huge shout out. But yeah, then packed it all up and put in the replacement unit on Saturday morning and off to Fitzgerald's. And it was definitely an intense experience to be in Chicago on St. Patrick's Day at Fitzgerald's recording. It was Ike Reilly and Brendan O'Shea. Between the Loyola game and Brendan opening up, the Shannon Rovers came out, and so here's a shot of this. I recorded that for the club with the room mics and audience mics, just as a thank you. I don't know if it's so much a thank you for them, but I think it was actually fun. The shows were great. Packed it all up. Drove 6 hours early the next morning, to Turf's Club, try to do it all over again. But one of the things I learned is you sort of have to be super flexible. They felt like there was not enough room on the stage, and the stage was much smaller for the splitter rack, and it was better off to be in the right in front of house, and super nice, made a huge space for me in front of house to house the splitter in front of their mixer. I was definitely tired. I definitely slowed them down. Just, little things sort of bite you in the ass. The cables that we labeled, I'm going to try and bring it out here. This is a pro tip. Sorry, Joe, for this last minute change. I don't know if you can zoom in. So pro tip is label everything on both sides. So you really know what number is what, and you don't have to struggle. But little things like that were, a good learning experience, to say the least. And we have a shot, I think, of the rig in front of house. It worked fine. There are a number of compromises. The iPad is a third-party device. Even just sort of setting it up now, I tried a bunch of stuff to get it to connect, and then I realized I'd better turn it off completely, the iPad, and turn it on, and then it connected the first time. I think you have to accept the compromises that you make based on your design goals. The design goals were successful. And in fact, Ike has given us permission to put up 30 seconds of one of his songs that we recorded, and we'll have that as a download link. I think I'll pause, and if there's any questions.
If you would have brought something that you didn't, what would that have been?
I think a little more serenity. I think for me it was, could I have brought less? I brought a lot of XLR cable, which came in handy the first night, but not the second night. I had weird things happen. The shipping thing was weird, but even I brought, I'm a fan of, not that I sort of have really extensively listened, but I like the sound of Countryman direct boxes. And so I brought a few of those, and one I hot patched by mistake and blew it. which I'd never, like, 30 years of audio, 35 years of doing audio. I'd never actually blown something by hot patching it. I mean, I'm pretty, anyways, but that was weird. I don't know. I don't, it's a good question. I think I kept toying with the idea of, like, could I have done a mix? One thing I did bring that I forgot to mention that was super handy was these remote audio high noise headsets. I don't think I would, I would have been a basket case if I didn't bring them. I just wouldn't have been able to tell what I got. Maybe like another person, like, I don't know. I think for me, it's all a learning experience. So it's maybe also a category of, not knowing what I don't know. I made some funny choices about audience mics. I used 60s for audience mics, and I think that they're okay, but I didn't really have enough height on them, and so they're sort of oddly specific in the mix. Yeah, I mean, I think probably people, like, if you download the clip, you guys can tell me what I should have brought.
And one other question is, how many cases did you bring in total?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So it was this case. This case was 120 pounds, 110 pounds. So one thing I would have changed is, this Power Star Life, lovely product. Overkill if it's just powering the Joco. I really, one of the things I want to do is build, and I think this is, pretty simple to build, a device that will transport the iPad control stuff over the same Dante cable, and also tell me if power is unplugged, because that I could at least run on stage and just replug the power, because this alone makes it over the limit to fly with. I looked it up, 100 pounds is what, anything over 100 pounds, and they really have the right to just flat out refuse it. Whereas at least if it approaches 100 pounds, you could make a case, no pun intended, to bring it. So there was this case, and there were two other cases, and my backpack. A Pelican 1510 that I put fragile stuff in to fly with. Like, the sound devices traveled with me and some of the mics. And that I carried on, and then a Pelican 1650 with, like, all the cables and stuff like that. And then another just soft suitcase with my clothes and stuff. Yeah, and SUV. It had to fit in an SUV. I mean, that was, yeah. I did, to answer the one thing about the first question, Joe, is a hand truck. I ended up having to go to Home Depot and buy a hand truck, just because I didn't want to have to leave stuff in the car. So I bought a hand truck, and then a furniture pad, so I could cover up anything left in the car. But yeah, cool. All right, so I think. I hope that this was instructive. Yeah, I mean, again, I found it challenging to, like, for example, record drums with no limiter. And there are some Dante-controlled mic preamps that have limiters in them. But, again, you keep going back to that design criteria. I have to be able to carry this by myself. I have to be able to lift this up into my SUV by myself late at night. So, there are definitely a number of compromises. I would have liked to do more audience mics. The audience sounds a little thin, but, I was alone, so effectively alone. Yeah, and again, I say alone, but huge help from tour managers and front of house mixers, and, of course, Second City Sound. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up. And yeah, email me, call me if you have any questions. But thank you very much for watching. Thank you guys for putting up with our late start. And I thank you and the crew.
just a quick rundown. Law of Wiring seminar with Chris Newman this on Saturday, April 14th. Actually, it's Chris Newman and a whole bunch of really experienced boom operators. So it's going to be very, very exciting. There's a booming masterclass with Ken Strain, and that's sponsored by K-Tech and Gotham. And if you have any interest in how to wire or how to boom, this is a great opportunity, both of these. Gotham Sound Expo, if you have interest in gear, come geek out with us on May 5th. And as always, video archives at gothamsound.tv. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and please send your ideas for future shows to info@gothamsound.com. Thank you very much for watching.